Good evening. I'm Amy Robach, sitting in for Keith Olbermann. If, as the Bush administration claims, we are fighting in Iraq so we do not have to face the threat of another terror attack here in the U.S., why is it that al-Qaeda has been able to regain its strength to a level it has not enjoyed since just before the 9/11 attacks? Our fifth story on the countdown, U.S. intelligence analysts reaching a devastating conclusion about the state of the war on terror. Two more Republican senators reaching a conclusion that it is time to get out of the conflict that many believe is distracting us from that fight, the war in Iraq. We begin tonight with the bad news for the White House. Mr. Bush might have hoped the biggest news he'd make today would be for the opening of the new White House briefing room. Instead, it is likely most of the reporters in the press corps will once again be filing stories on the many problems facing the White House. Perhaps he should have been a little nicer to those reporters.
Welcome back to the West Wing. We missed you. Sort of. I've always felt comfortable behind the podium in front of you, kind of as a shield. But I would like a tour. Yeah, but well, it's not exactly bulletproof. Some of your bullets are able to, verbal bullets are able to penetrate.
Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill today, more fallout over the war in Iraq. In the Senate, Republicans filibustering a vote on Senator Webb's amendment that would have required giving troops just as much time to rest between deployments as they are on active duty, what some might call an amendment to support the troops.
Some of my Republican colleagues are protecting their president rather than protecting our troops.
The President of the United States is not going to begin to entertain this. No president would. No president could sit on the sidelines and watch the authority of the Commander-in-Chief be taken over by the political moment.
But perhaps the biggest problem for the White House, as we mentioned, two more Republican senators, Olympia Snowe and Chuck Hagel, no longer merely threatening to vote with the Democrats, but joining forces to introduce their own legislation to begin an Iraq pullout this fall. Nearly a dozen Republican senators now having called on President Bush to start bringing the troops home. The White House sending National Security Advisor Stephen Hadley to the Hill today in an attempt to talk GOP lawmakers out of it. Senator Snowe said she received a call from Secretary of State Rice urging her to wait until General Petraeus gives his report in September. Only those Republican lawmakers in no danger of defecting from the White House, like Senator John McCain, got an actual briefing from the president himself.
Our message is that there is progress, that the last part of the surge was just in place 2 weeks ago, and that we adopted a new strategy, and this strategy is succeeding and should be given a chance to succeed. And maybe September is the seminal moment. I don't know.
Time now to call in our own Craig Crawford, also a columnist for Congressional Quarterly. Craig, good evening.
Good evening.
All right, so we've heard from the Bush administration for quite some time that this administration or our military has been able to capture or kill 75% of known al-Qaeda leaders. They've said that we're fighting the terrorists over there, so we don't have to fight them here. But this draft intelligence report, does it basically undercut most of the progress that we've heard about on the war on terror?
Yeah, if it weren't so deadly, it would be a Abbott and Costello comedy routine. Who's on first? Is al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and Pakistan or Iraq? The president has asserted so much recently that it's all about Iraq, but here this report from within his own administration suggests that the real problem is back in Pakistan and presumably Afghanistan, where we once were.
Yeah, and Craig, it was thought heading into this month that the Democrats would really be leading the charge in terms of forcing votes on Iraq, pulling out our troops, and now we're seeing Republicans begin their own legislation. How symbolically significant is that?
Well, I think the problem Democrats have is they're still short of those votes they need to override a veto. I mean, it's getting closer. I mean, we learned today, at least in this Webb amendment cloture vote, maybe 4 votes somewhere around there in the Senate. In the House, maybe a few more. Democrats still lack what they need to stop this president. Because you know what, Amy? This president doesn't care what the majority of Congress thinks or what the majority of the public thinks. It's only when enough votes on the Hill arise to override a veto that he will care.
Yeah, and you mentioned the filibuster of the Webb amendment today. Why would Republicans block a vote on a measure that would support the troops?
This isn't Bush's war anymore, Amy. This is the Republican Party's war, if this is how they're going to continue to vote. I mean, they are looking at, down the road in the 2008 elections, this being beyond George Bush. If they continue to vote to support him, this is the Republican Party's war, and the 2008 election will be a referendum on the war in Iraq, Democrat versus Republican, the way these GOP lawmakers are setting it up right now.
Well, let's talk about House Republican leader John Boehner. He referred to Senators Lugar, Domenici, and others who have called for a change in Iraq as wimps. Do you think that's going to come back to haunt him? I mean, is that the best way for a party leader to hold a caucus together?
The problem with people like Boehner and others, even a lot of the Republican presidential candidates, is they're playing to the base of the Republican Party, who still support the president on this war in pretty high numbers, and like that talk like wimp applied to those like Democrats and others and some moderate Republicans who want to get out of the war. And as long as they're playing to that base, I guess they like preaching to the choir. They're just sort of blind to what the congregation thinks. Let's
talk about Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. She contacted Olympia Snowe today, according to the senator, trying to urge her to hold off any decision she has until she hears from General Petraeus. Although there's been a lot of video of Secretary of State playing golf, saying she likes anything that ends in a score. We mentioned that phone call. Given the diplomacy is her job, what do you think? Do these pictures cause any problems for her spending a lot of time on the links instead of probably focusing on what she should be focusing on?
I got to tell you, when I first saw that, I had to think, is Condi Rice starting to put some distance between herself and the White House? One way to do that is to head for the links, I suppose, maybe next to the beach in August. I do think Secretary of State Condi Rice is getting out of the loop in this administration policy, and it suggests, as a lot of people think, that good old Dick Cheney is still in charge, at least of what the president thinks.
Yeah, I mean, where do things stand in the White House right now with Congress and obviously a lot of Republicans turning against the White House at this point in time? What do you think is really going on behind the scenes? What's being said?
The president is sticking to his guns. He's threatening to veto. I haven't seen any daylight as far as he's concerned. We've heard a lot from his administration in the way of leaks and suggestions and hints. I still think there's a shell game going on as far as what the president's doing with the Democrats in Congress, and it's not any real change on his part and where he's headed with this policy. He's sticking to his guns because, again, I don't think he cares what the majority of Congress or the public thinks. Dick Cheney said that the Sunday before the midterm election, asked about how the public viewed the war and the polls showing that they oppose the war, and he said, and I quote, "It does not matter. We're not running for anything."
All right. Craig Crawford, we appreciate it. Thank you.